Hey everyone, Gleb Alexandrov here. We're kicking off a brand new series dedicated to unlocking the power of SMOUSE Add-ons for Blender. We're talking about bringing industry standard shaders and lighting effects, the kind of previously only accessible in high-end commercial software, directly into your favorite open source platform. Kodi, aka SMOUSE, is bringing these tools into Blender as commercial add-ons and assets. And as a lighting enthusiast, I'm eager to explore how these add-ons can empower artists and streamline workflows. In this first video, we're going underwater. We'll be tackling the magic of underwater Caustics, a fantastic SMOUSE tool that makes achieving this effect surprisingly easy. There is a free version if you want to give it a try, yet I'll be using the commercial version which is available on Blender Market. I've also included an affiliate link to the SMOUSE products bundle in the description down below. Now a quick word about installing SMOUSE tools. Strictly speaking, there are two types of SMOUSE resources. The add-ons, which need to be installed through the add-ons or extensions menu, so Shaders Plus for instance is an add-on. The rest are assets. Underwater Caustics, gobos and so on. These are meant for the asset browser, and as such you don't install it in the traditional sense, but rather you import them. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Let's start with Shaders Plus. To install it, go Edit, Preferences, get Extensions, then click this chevron and Install from Disk. And point it to Shaders Plus in this case. I already have it installed, by the way. Alternatively, even quicker way is to simply drag and drop the zip file directly onto this tab. Then say OK. Then you should be able to find it among the add-ons. Just make sure that the checkbox next to its name is ticked. Then, to import the assets, the process looks slightly different. Head over to the file paths within the preferences, and then unzip the archives. It's easy to forget this step, so double check it. Gobos Plus might take a while to unpack, that's perfectly normal. And then just hit plus in this menu, open the folder with the assets that you want to import, and add the asset library at the bottom. I'll also do it for this one. And of course the gobos. So all three SMOUSE libraries are ready to go. Finally click Save Preferences to make sure Blender remembers these settings. Now we are going to dive into Underwater Caustics. See what I did? An impeccable shader package by SMOUSE that can be used for simulating the mesmerizing patterns of light that occur when sunlight bends and refracts through moving water. However, this asset library for Blender achieves this beautiful lighting effect without complex simulations and stuff. It works in both Cycles and Eevee, and we are talking almost real-time, highly optimized performance. So welcome to the Underwater Caustics Essentials. Alright, again, this is a library designed for Blender's asset browser. It offers three distinct types of caustics: underwater, surface and depth. We'll take a look at each one of them in just a moment. For the smoothest workflow, I think it's worth opening the asset browser in a separate window, like here for instance. Then I recommend filtering it out to just the underwater caustics, so we can see what we've got here without any noise, so nothing can distract us. We've got a bunch of assets here, each marked with an icon representing its type. You can change the size of the thumbnails here, by the way. So, where am I? The icons, right. So this icon means it's a material. And this is a node group to be used in the shader editor. And this is an object that you can drag right into the 3D viewport. And it will get populated there within your 3D scene just like that. So these object assets are really easy to just click and drag like that. That is a quick start. I'll delete these for now. As far as the render engines go, some shaders will work in Eevee just as well. Notably, it's the surface and depth caustics that will work in Eevee. This will work just fine. While the underwater light pattern, which is the first one here, aka Caustics Light Material, it uses projection, so it won't work in Eevee. Projection requires ray tracing, so it will work in Cycles only. Alright, let's start with the Caustics Light Material. Let me show it how it works in Cycles. In the asset browser, let's select one with the light bulb icon here, meaning it's a light source. But first of all, I'll create a plane and add the Suzanne primitive as well, of course. Of course. I will move our monkey over here. I will also smooth it out by pressing Ctrl 1 and Ctrl 2 to add a few levels of subdivision. Then apply this modifier straight away. And now I will just click and drag this light onto the floor. It will get stuck in the floor, so I think we need to bring it up a touch. So instantly you can see that this light projects a caustic pattern, sort of a light texture, which we will be able to see in the shader editor as well. It's this group connecting to the standard emission shader, influencing its color and strength. Otherwise it's a regular spotlight, nothing more, with all its settings set as usual in this tab. The power, the color, you name it, the spot size. Just a regular spotlight, okay? Then, right, the magic is within this group mainly. So the emission color should be plugged over there, and then the emission strength over here. Then we can go ahead and start adjusting the knobs and sliders, controlling the caustics intensity and whatnot. All of that is neatly exposed for us to tweak. The intensity is pretty self-explanatory. Then we have this Is Area Light checkbox, which if you switch it on will still work okay with our spotlight, but as its name suggests, it's mainly for area lights. Actually, that could be quite important. So if that was an area light, let's make it larger by the way. First of all, if it was the area light, we'd have to set its spread all the way to 0, pretty much to just make it work. So spread to 0, then control its size over here. And that checkbox in the settings must be switched on, otherwise it won't do anything. That's pretty cool that it works with area lights like that. Let me switch it back to spot and untick this variable. The thing is, the spotlight and the way it projects the expanding cone of rays is very different from the way the area light works. The spot kind of projects it all from one point, so it really depends on where you place it. By changing its angle, we can achieve a lot of interesting effects, like the rays being projected very squarely like that, or on the contrary being smeared across the surface. It's really sensitive to how close it is and just where you put the source. Most of the fun comes from playing with the shader though. Oh, actually, you can tell that I have viewport denoising running in the background. That's why it's so smooth. Right, let's do a quick overview of the settings. Okay, intensity is obviously how powerful it is, how much light it emits. The thing about it is that even at lower power, some areas are still going to be pretty hot. Pretty HDR, if you know what I mean. It's especially evident in animation, if you scrub the timeline or whatever. These brighter spots bouncing around. So if we hit play, the effect should come alive and should affect all the objects it's projected onto in our viewport, which is really, really cool. So it should just work. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Once you keep adding objects, they should receive this effect automatically. That's good news, I guess, as you no longer have to worry about it. A super important thing to understand about projection is that it's affected by the light radius. A higher radius means blurrier shadows and blurrier projections as well. That is a major setting to tweak if you want to create softer looking caustics. But then of course we can have a bit of both by duplicating the light and making one light really harsh with 0 radius perhaps, and the other one really soft and splendid at a larger radius and maybe a different color as well. And these lights should get added together in a physically correct way. That's great. That's a trick we can definitely try using. Okay, let's get back to our initial setup though. Alrighty, what else do we have here? The scale, of course, making it bigger or smaller. The caustics pattern. Usually I try to keep it balanced, whatever it means. Then we have surface warpability, which is a way of adding extra disturbance to the pattern. It can be seen in motion in a clearer way. It can be larger than 1, by the way, although it would look a bit funky. Like that. So that's warpability, it is. The exposure is similar to the intensity, I guess, but also introduces some clipping in the darker areas. Clamp exposure, on the contrary, is clipping the higher end. Let's zoom in onto one of these spots to see it better. It's like applying extra clipping, which, by the way, can be really useful at times. Let me show you why. I'll open the compositor, because we'll need to turn one particular effect on. Use nodes. Shift A. Filter glare. And also in the viewport settings, enable the real-time compositor set to process always. Now watch this. The glare effect lets us see what was really bright. You see, it's now picking up all these glints, all these hot areas, and amplifies them with this effect. And we see, oh, these were hot to begin with. The exposure clamp can be used to mitigate those hotter areas if that was something you wanted to do. Actually, switching it over to bloom should make it even more evident what's going on. You see? That's the exposure clamp, and that's why it is useful. Which, by the way, works similarly to clamping the highlights in the cycle settings in the light paths. I think it's the direct light. So it has a similar effect, helping to set the maximum for these extremities, so that they don't cross a certain threshold and burn through your retina. You know, that sort of stuff. Although it can look cool, so either this or use the exposure clamp. This may seem like a minor detail, yet you know that I'm such a nerd when it comes to color management, so that makes a lot of sense to me to care about such details. To show the fall-off sliders, I'll bring the lamp a bit closer like that, a bit closer to the surface, I mean. Right. The second fall-off is how far it can reach. That's a nice effect indeed. Clamp near is the opposite of it. Whoops, it's pretty sensitive, so be careful. It's where the light starts. Yeah, something like that. Let me Ctrl Z it to the previous placement though. The text overlay drives me mad. Let's kill it. Then the blur strength. What does it do? Apart from tweaking the light radius to blur it from here, we can blur it right in the shader settings. Or if it's an area light. Yeah, with area lights, the size won't change the projection sharpness, remember? It's the spread that softens it up. So, instead of doing all of that, we can just adjust the blur, the strength and the distance-based fall-off. I always appreciate an extra versatility, so I think it's pretty cool. Now back to the spotlight. Let's see some animation. Once we hit play, it should play. If toggle animation is checked, that is. And then we have some controls to tinker around with, like evolution speed. If we set it really low, we'll be left with this kind of wobbling or waviness only, with its properties controlled here. And without waviness, it will be just the evolving pattern. We can set the wave scale, frequency and direction to our liking, to make it flow how we like. Now let my coffee flow down my throat. And the coffee was good. You see, without the waviness, it will be just that sort of shimmering, like a water glade disturbed by wind or something. And the X and Y directions can be used to simulate the flow. These settings are super fun to play with once you start experimenting with it. I find this Caustics effect to be especially striking when paired with a volume shader. So here I'm going to add a cube, which is going to be our fog volume. I will give it a new material, fog. Open the shader editor. Let's swap this default material to principled volume from the Shift-A menu. Swoosh. Right away, let's reduce the density because it's way too dense. Maybe to 0.05. So personally, I think these god rays or light shafts projected from the source are just so beautiful. Here I made it probably a little bit too pronounced, but I think it looks gorgeous anyway, especially the way it's animated. Of course, as we have seen before, this effect is animated straight out of the box. Such a good job by Cody, offering us this beautiful, beautiful effect. This one has a little bit of noise, but it can be denoised in the render settings to mitigate this effect to a certain extent. Now, we probably don't have to know that to be able to use it, but if you're interested, you can hit Tab to expand the context of this Caustics node group to see what's inside, what lurks beneath the waves, so to speak. So let's just say it's a lot of work to be found there. You don't really have to make sense of it, and neither do I. There are more groups inside this group. Just know that if you are accidentally stuck there, this button will help you get back to the surface. Kudos to Cody for saving us a lot of time, I guess. By the way, in the asset browser, we can find this node group right here, the one with the node icon. This one is the same as this one here. The one, I mean, in the shader editor. So we can just drag it into the shader editor at any point, and it will create this group for us. Just something I wanted to point out again. Now let's talk about how you can use this library to add richness and believability to your underwater scenes for rendering realistic light refraction effects there, needless to say. Here's a quick underwater cave scene I put together, and we use cycles here. So this is the first spotlight I've added, with the light Caustics node group defining its color and strength, shining some light from the depths of this underwater cave, which is a photoscan model from Sketchfab, by the way. Here I've just quickly dialed these settings to where I like them. Nothing too fancy. Then to make it a bit more vibrant, I've created a second spotlight with slightly different settings. A slightly higher frequency pattern, that is. And the third light, this time a pretty large area light with this checkbox turned on. The area light spanning across the entire cave, shining from the top down. It's top down because I wanted this projection to be not distorted, let's say. All of that is animated right out of the box, needless to say. So this is the first caustic pass, and here are all the passes combined to create what hopefully looks like a vivid underwater light play. Essentially, all these light rays create secondary bounces in cycles, if the max bounce count allows, adding extra realism and also introducing some noise. But that's okay, as we are using denoising here. Finally, we have the fog volume here, which really helps sell these underwater effects, revealing the beautiful light beams. Combined with the blue-tinged volume absorption, it works so well for selling this kind of atmosphere. Since most rays point towards the camera, it looks quite impactful as well. Then, to motivate this whole spectacle, I've added a plane imitating the water surface, this reflective, refractive object. There is an issue though. If you just place an object between the lights and the camera like that, it will block the incoming lights, right? Which is probably not what we want, even though its surface would still look kind of cool, with this fancy effect on top. So to make it more transparent, to actually let some light through, we can either try enabling this cycle's caustics, reflective, but mostly refractive in this case. The problem is that, yeah, it will let some rays pass through, but it will just scatter them. So the caustics pattern will be gone, the beautiful sharp pattern. And that's a shame, right? So that won't cut it. Actually, it won't matter what roughness value is set, none of that will fix it. The lower value in the filter glossy tab won't help either. So I guess what I want to say is that the real caustics here are of little use. The way to fix it and to make it let some light pass through is to adjust the shader. For instance, to combine the glass shader with something like the transparent BSDF. And just make it a tiny bit transparent. And that would kind of work. Or we can make it not cast any shadow by adding the light path node and using the isShadowRay output as a mix factor. So that will exclude this water surface from casting shadows. And that is pretty decent. Yeah, it can definitely work this way. Let's see. Adding the principled BSDF shader, setting the roughness to 0. And the transmission weight all the way to 1, and then tweaking the alpha is yet another way of achieving a similar goal. Yet I would pay homage to yet another fantastic add-on by SMOUSE Shaders Plus, which we'll have a look at a bit later. I would definitely use this shader to add that extra layer of caustics, because this shader from the Shaders Plus pack has the built-in caustics as well, which kind of multiplies that effect, making it even more interesting. I would animate the procedural noise, then plugged into the normal map to add some extra disturbance on the surface. And then you see you can increase the caustic strength of that Shaders Plus material to generate the secondary caustics. And that is just insane. Let's face it. The fact that it manages to run that fast makes me go, whoa, no way. But it is what it is. Alright, we won't go there just yet, into the Shaders Plus territory. We'll do that in another video. But let me just say that it's so fun to change the lensing factor, the index of refraction, and other very, very cool parameters of that refractive water surface acting as a lens here. And making everything look even more dope. Then with some fog. Give me a break. Cool, so that was the underwater caustics, or to be more exact, the light material part of it. But that's not all. This asset library also features the surface caustics shader, the second type of fake caustics that can be applied as an emissive material, this time onto any surface in both Cycles and Eevee, to generate real-time rippled highlights. So to make it clear once again, the light texture-based underwater caustics are amazing, but that they won't work in Eevee. For real-time rendering, this asset library includes a slightly different approach. So I'll create another demo plane to show how this is done really quickly. And another monkey for that matter. Okay. Eevee, this time, rendered mode. Ray tracing can be left switched on for some extra definition in the shadows, I mean. So this caustic light that we've tried before won't function in Eevee. I mean, it would just be a plain light without any texture, because that node won't work in Eevee. As simple as that. So what we can do instead is create a new material for that plane first. I'll call it Caustics. So that will be a purely shading effect. I'll go Shift A, Underwater Caustics, Node Groups, Surface Caustics Pro, or we can find one in the asset browser with the node symbol and drag it over here. What was that sound? And then simply connect the color to... Actually, for now, let's just simply plug it into Surface. My god, what's going on outside? It's always like that when I'm recording. Anyway. Okay, we're good. Here's the intensity slider and other essential settings, such as... yeah, no more sounds. Yeah, such as color of that effect, kind of a base layer, which in some cases should probably be black or near black, to let the pattern itself shine and maintain proper contrast. The blur strength parameter is instrumental to keeping this texture in focus, otherwise it will be quite blurry by default, which isn't necessarily a good thing. It also includes a built-in procedural animation, like the previous one that we have checked. Okay, let's darken it a little bit more. It's like a backlighting in LED screens removed, if you know what I mean. I'm gonna plug this default shade back now and make it a bit darker. Actually, I meant to plug it into the emission color. Alright. Usually we have a shader that already features some texture, right? Or maybe it has its own color. And we're adding the caustics on top of it. And these caustics are emissive, or they emit light. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we can plug it into the emission color like that. Well, plugging the strength like that as well will amplify the effect, almost making it too strong, which makes me think it might actually look better without it. Anyway, another option is to plug it here instead, into albedo, or base color. Probably after amplifying the color lightness a bit. And here we can tweak the intensity. But that means it will replace the texture, if there was a texture there, obviously. Let's see, let's imagine that this was our texture. Procedural noise, why not? It could have been our actual texture, right? What we could do is mix it with the Surface Caustics Pro color, using the Add blending mode. And of course, controlling the mixing factor, all of that. So that's how we would add it to our existing base texture. Actually, the rest of the objects can also be textured or shaded in a similar way by mixing this Surface Caustics component into their materials. Now, compared to the first method of adding caustics that we have discussed, the light texture I mean, this isn't probably the most straightforward way, and it won't interact with volume shaders and such to create beautiful light shafts, but it does have its own advantages. It's fast, it's real-time in fact, it works in Eevee, and it just has its own specific application. Here I have a little scene to demonstrate how the Surface Caustic shader can be used in a real-world scenario, a typical underwater scene, a coral reef. Once again, this is Eevee. As you can see, it's running probably at a real-time frame rate. And this is the Caustic Surface shader. Let's see how it's set up. Shift F3 to open the shader editor. So this is our shader, like we've laid it out before. It's just layered over the original material. Here's how it's set up. Yeah, here we go. This material has just one texture, which is the base color. This one. You see, nothing special. Then to add caustics, it's just a matter of plugging the caustics color straight into the emission color. With the strength going into the strength input correspondingly. Or better yet, you know what? Let's probably unplug the strength and bring the base caustics color all the way down to black. Or maybe it can have some tint. You know, a bluish tint, almost simulating ambient or bounced light. Something subtle, like a faint bluish tint indeed. The scale, that's up to you. That's totally an artistic choice. That doesn't have to be on the higher frequency side. Yeah, that looks good to me. Then any other objects that show up in the scene, they can pretty much just inherit the caustics material, for starters at least. Just copy the material to selected, and hopefully that'll make them look integrated without any effort. Now, when the basic effect is in place, the rest is all about adding some extra haze, a typical bluish underwater haze. It could be worth bringing in a few extra lamps to highlight it, giving it a more dramatic, or one might say cinematic look. The intensity is totally up to you. Then it's worth checking out the color management tab, specifically the view transform, which I've set here to very low contrast. And don't forget to take a look at the exposure as well. Cool. Next, feel free to spend some time with these procedural parameters. Who knows, maybe you've got a different idea in mind for how underwater refraction should look, in your opinion. Whether it's something more stylized, or I don't know, on the contrary, like a Nat Geo Wild documentary or something. These sliders, to sum it up, offer a lot of flexibility, even though it's not some super complex add-on or anything like that. Finally, I couldn't help but season it with a touch of our magical dust particles. That Eevee motion blur is trippy. And that isn't all too, we also have depth caustics. This is the third type or method for creating the rays beneath the surface effect. It works okay in both Eevee and Cycles, but I'll use Cycles for this demonstration. As a quick reminder, you can find it in the asset browser. Underwater caustics. Now we need the depth caustics object. I'll click it and drag right into the viewport and drop it right here. M, and down it goes into the depth caustics collection. To make it easier to use, I'll also add in the area light, so we actually have some photons penetrating the surface, so we can see what's beneath. Cool. I'll also raise the output of this light source. Okay, now jumping into its shader settings in just a moment, we can see it consists of a few pre-made node groups. The SMOUSE depth collection shader itself with a bunch of settings and all that. You can also find it here under the Shift-A menu. But there's also this custom water shader as a bonus. That's how it's set up. Then it would be great to have something beneath these waves, I suppose, to reveal the depth effect and all of that, and how it influences the stuff beneath the surface. Because honestly, it's a pretty good looking shader. It deserves it. So that's the depth effect, plus these streaks of light penetrating the surface, enhancing the illusion of depth, I guess. Animated. So in this node, we've got the caustics intensity. This controls the intensity of those light streaks mainly, but these streaks also obey the light clamping, the direct light clamping to be exact, if you want to fine-tune how intense they appear on screen. For now, I'll set it back to 0 on no clamping. Next, we have the water and caustics colors. It can be anything, of course, but I think it looks slightly more believable if the caustics tint is somewhere in the ballpark of the watercolor, not too far apart. Then we've got this scale, of course. Remember, not too big, not too small. Keep it balanced. The caustic exposure and the clamps. This one is interesting, the depth settings. Without depth, this effect will mostly look like a distorted cellular grid on the surface, which is fine, but with the addition of depth, check out how these streaks kind of extend along the Z-axis. In depth. Almost like they're reaching deep into the water, and that's probably the best part of this effect, with the color fade controlling how much of the caustic tint is blended in with the base color. The dispersion controls are a hallmark of the SMOUSE resources. You can always count on the SMOUSE stuff to feature amazing, physically plausible chromatic aberration, and this library is no exception. Here's a quick breakdown of a scene featuring depth caustics in action. There's some kind of a floor created with displacement and a PBR shader from Polyhaven. Boom, here's a plane with the depth caustics material, simulating clear Caribbean water. Without any caustics, it would look like this, just with the custom water shader featuring some procedural bump or procedural normal map, with the expression driving the evolution of the noise. So it's constantly shifting, kind of flowing, and it flows in a certain direction as well. Stuff like that. Let me know in the comments, by the way, if you want me to unpack this in more detail. Anyway, there's this flowing effect, simply to set the stage for the depth caustics effect to shine. You know, to motivate it in a certain way. Oh, a fun fact. Actually, there's a dispersion slider in the water shader as well. Well, who could have guessed? And then the star of the show makes its grand entrance, the depth caustics. It's a pretty boring tutorial at this point, because it just looks great. We enable any feature, like any, and it just looks awesome. I almost feel sorry for not having to nudge too many sliders this time. Somehow it just keeps looking decent. Okay, that's the depth caustics in action. What else did I want to share? What else? Yeah, there's the volume output available. To make use of it, we just need to toggle volume. I wonder if we can see it better from this angle. The volume output should be connected with the... with what, actually? With the volume socket of the material for it to work. So that should add some extra depth to the depth-based caustic effect. So feel free to experiment with it. Then I will leave the animation settings to you, as this video is probably starting to feel a bit boring. Or have been boring for the last 20 minutes. Hopefully not for too long. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. So there you have it, a deep dive, pun intended, into the world of SMOUSE underwater caustics. Remember, the free version is a great way to get started, and the commercial version unlocks even more power. Don't forget to check out the links in the description below, including my affiliate link to the SMOUSE products bundle. And in the next videos, we'll be diving even deeper into the SMOUSE ecosystem, exploring Shaders Plus, bringing the industry standard shaders and lighting effects into Blender. And remember, we are running that little engagement experiment, so if you found this video helpful, a like and a comment would be hugely appreciated.